Hello, in this video I'm going to be teaching some of the basic definitions, what displacement, velocity, and acceleration are mainly. So we have displacement, which basically means the distance traveled. And that sometimes I'll write it as d, and sometimes I'll write it as this delta x. So this is what you'll This is what you'll generally see it as, delta x. I might write it as x occasionally. I'll try to stick with writing the delta x. D you'll see it occasionally. These are all the same thing. So all these are the same. And basically what that is you can write it as the final position, the final x value, minus the initial x value, equals the displacement, the change. And what that really means is if I start off at the 50, or if I end up at the 50-yard line, hold on a second, let me space this out a little bit. Whoop. If I end up at the 50-yard line, and I started at, say, the 20-yard line, so final position is 50, initial position was 20. If I ended at the 50 and I started at the 20, well then I traveled 30 yards. Right? So that should make sense. It's just how far you traveled. The next thing that I'm going to cover is velocity. This is a little bit harder to teach, but it should make sense. For a lot of the time that I'm talking, I'm going to say speed. I'm going to use velocity and speed interchangeably, because in general they mean the same thing, except for velocity has a direction. But when you hear me say speed, I'm probably talking about velocity. But velocity is just speed in some direction. So the speed could be 30 miles an hour. The velocity is maybe 30 miles an hour north, or at some angle. In other words, velocity is how far you travel in some amount of time. Velocity is how far you velocity is how far you travel in some amount of time. So it's how far you travel divided by the time it takes you. So we have that in maybe meters. Well, we'll just say meters per second, or maybe miles per hour. Those are some units you might see for speed: miles per hour, meters per second. Those are speed, velocity. To be honest, this is only actually the average velocity, because say I'm traveling say I get on the highway and I travel 60 miles and it takes me an hour. Well then, yeah, obviously I was traveling 60 miles an hour on average. But maybe at some points there was traffic and I was slowed down to 50 miles an hour. Maybe at some points I was in a rush, so I sped up to 65 miles an hour. The point is that it averages out to 60 miles an hour. So what we can say is that actually, if your speed was increasing at a steady rate, for example, if you just leave your foot on the gas pedal and you're accelerating at a steady rate, we'll get to acceleration in a sec, then really what you have is you have the velocity that you begin at, right? And you have the velocity that you end at, the final velocity. So as long as it's a steady increase on that time, here you got the initial velocity, here you got the final or rather, here is the initial velocity, here is the final velocity. So what is the average point right here? Well, that's just the average of the two velocities. We've got initial velocity plus final velocity. Here, let me make that thicker. Initial velocity plus final velocity divided by 2. And that's just the average. You know how to do that. So it's the average of the two velocities is equal to the average velocity. It sounds redundant. Velocity average, right here, which is also really what this is equal to the average of your beginning and ending speeds, your beginning and ending velocities. This is kind of a semi-important formula. We'll use this to get some other equations later on in a couple other videos. Okay, acceleration. Acceleration is speeding up or speeding down. For the most part, we'll talk about speeding up because it'll just make more sense. Acceleration is the amount that speed changes in some amount of time. So acceleration is how much your speed, the velocity changes, and by the way, delta just means change. It means how much something changes. It's how much your velocity changes, how much your speed changes in some amount of time. So that's like, remember we said meters per second, or miles per hour per second. So if a car goes from like 0 to 60 in 6 seconds, then it's accelerating at okay. If it's going from 0 to 60 in 6 seconds, just trust me on the math for now, it's going at 10 miles per hour per second. And this is where the seconds squared comes from. When you see that, don't say to yourself meters per second squared, because that just doesn't make sense. What the hell is a meter per second squared? I don't know. No one does. It just doesn't make sense. It's confusing. Don't think of it like that. Instead, say to yourself meters per second, because that's exactly what it is. It's the changing in speed per unit time. So it's how much, or like miles per hour per second. If I'm going 0 to 60 in 6 seconds, then I'm changing my miles per hour by some amount every 1 second. Acceleration is how much you change your velocity in some amount of time. So change your velocity over time, or what is the change in velocity? How else could we say that maybe? So the change in velocity. Well, you could say that it's however fast you end up minus however fast you started off, right? Because if I start off going at 20 miles an hour, and by the time I'm done, my final velocity is 60 miles an hour, well then, that means that my change in velocity, the amount that I speeded up, was 40 miles an hour, right? That should make sense. Well then, what's speed and velocity over time? What's change in velocity over time? We can rewrite this thing right here to say acceleration is your final velocity minus your initial velocity, forgive the handwriting, divided by time. And that's another kind of important equation that hopefully now will make sense. It's how much you change your speed divided by how long it takes. So if our initial velocity is 0, we're starting from rest, and then we said 0 to 60 in 6 seconds. Well, 0 minus 60 is 60. 6 goes there. 60 divided by 6 equals 10. So we have 10 miles per hour and I'm going to write it out, per second. I'm going to write some of it out. I'm actually going to make this a little bit clearer so you don't confuse it with meters. It's miles per hour per second. Hopefully that makes sense. Displacement is how far you travel. Velocity is how fast you travel. And acceleration is how much you speed up, how fast you speed up. Average velocity is just the average of your beginning and your ending times. Hopefully that was clear. Hopefully that's intuitive to you. Hopefully you can hear most of what I'm saying, because I've had some sound problems. But give me feedback. Let me know what helped, what didn't, or if you need any help on anything else. Hope this helps. See you next video.